My former friends said, "You're too boring for our group." They excluded me from New Year's plans. 5 years later, they're all stuck in dead-end jobs. I'm traveling the world with my new circle. Hey Reddit, we're just being honest with you. You don't really fit the vibe anymore. The words hit me like cold water. I'd been sitting at our usual booth at Denny's, coffee halfway to my mouth, when Trevor said it. The rest of them, Marcus, Devin, and Chris, just nodded along like we were discussing weather patterns. I'm 43 now, but this happened when I was 38. Single at the time, working as a software analyst for a mid-sized firm in Portland. That Tuesday night in late December should have been just another hangout with guys I'd known since college. What does that even mean? I set my mug down carefully. Trevor leaned back, crossing his arms. Look, man, we're planning this big thing for New Year's. Renting a cabin up in Bend, bringing dates, the whole deal. It's going to be high energy, you know, and I'm not invited because... Marcus jumped in. It's not personal. You're just kind of a downer lately. Always talking about work protocols and compliance updates. When's the last time you did something spontaneous? I felt my chest tighten. I came out tonight spontaneously. You texted the group chat 3 days ago asking if we were meeting, Devin corrected. That's scheduling, not spontaneity. Chris, who'd been silent until then, finally spoke. You're a good guy, but you're boring, dude. Like, objectively. We need people who can keep up. The table went quiet. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen felt impossibly loud. So that's it. 20 years of friendship, and I'm cut because I'm not exciting enough. Trevor shrugged. We're not cutting you off. We're just recalibrating the group dynamic. You understand. I didn't understand, but I paid my check and left. The next few weeks were strange. I kept checking my phone, expecting apologies that never came. They posted photos from the cabin trip, champagne bottles, a hot tub lit up against snow, everyone laughing with people I'd never met. Not a single text asking where I was. I spent New Year's Eve alone in my apartment, watching the ball drop on TV with a microwave dinner on my lap. At midnight, I raised a glass of grocery store wine to nobody and wondered what the hell had just happened to my life. Work was my anchor. I showed up early, stayed late, threw myself into projects. My manager noticed. By February, she pulled me aside. You've been doing exceptional work lately. How would you feel about leading the audit team for our Singapore office expansion? Singapore, 3-month assignment. Full accommodations, travel budget, significant bonus. You'd be our point person for the entire Southeast Asian rollout. I said yes before I'd even thought it through. Singapore changed everything, but not in the way you'd expect. The work was intense. 18-hour days, constant video calls, navigating time zones and cultural differences. But something shifted in me. I started saying yes to invitations from colleagues. A rooftop bar after work. Street food tours on weekends. A hiking trip to Malaysia with a compliance team. One Friday night, I found myself at a hostel common room in Kuala Lumpur, playing cards with a Finnish backpacker, an Australian nurse, and a Japanese photographer who was documenting night markets across Asia. What do you do? The photographer asked me. Software compliance, I said automatically, then waited for eyes to glaze over. Instead, she leaned forward. That sounds stable. You must see a lot of international business practices. We talked for 3 hours. About cultural differences and data privacy. About the absurdity of trying to standardize global regulations. About how every country has its own relationship with rules. It was the first conversation in months where I didn't feel like I had to perform. The Singapore assignment extended to 6 months, then 9. I learned basic Mandarin. I joined a hiking group that met every Sunday at sunrise. I started documenting my travels on a private Instagram account. Nothing fancy, just photos of street corners and food stalls and mountain views. When I finally returned to Portland, it was almost a year later. The company had promoted me to senior analyst with a remote work option. They wanted me to help establish protocols for 3 more international offices. I changed. Not dramatically. I still loved spreadsheets and proper documentation. But I'd learned that being detail-oriented wasn't the same as being boring. It just meant I'd been around people who couldn't appreciate depth. I ran into Marcus at a grocery store on a random Thursday afternoon. He was in a rumpled hoodie, tossing frozen pizzas into his cart. Holy shit, hey. He seemed genuinely surprised to see me. Heard you were in Asia or something? Got back a couple months ago. Working remotely now. That's cool, that's cool. He shifted awkwardly. Hey, man, about that whole thing before you left. Don't worry about it. No, seriously. We were dicks. Trevor's idea, mostly, but we all went along with it. We should grab coffee sometime, catch up properly. I could see he meant it, but I also saw the tiredness around his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped. How've you been? I asked. Same old, same old. Still at the warehouse. Trevor's still bartending. Devin's doing Uber full-time now. His startup thing fell through. I don't actually know what Chris is doing. And you guys still hang out? Sometimes. Less than before. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing. He paused. You look good, though? Like, really good. What's your secret? I almost said something about perspective, about finding your people, about how being selective with your energy isn't the same as being boring. But Marcus wasn't really asking. Just staying busy, I said instead. We exchanged numbers, promised to text, both knew we wouldn't. That encounter should have felt satisfying. The classic revenge fantasy, old friends struggling while I thrived. But mostly I just felt sad for them. Until Trevor showed up at my apartment 3 weeks later. I'd just gotten off a video call with our Tokyo office when my buzzer rang. Through the intercom, hey, it's Trevor. Can we talk? I almost said no, but curiosity won. He looked worse than Marcus. Thinner, with a patchiness to his beard that suggested he'd stopped caring about grooming. I need to ask you something, he said before he'd even sat down. Are you hiring at your company? We're always looking for qualified candidates. I mean, can you get me a job? Put in a word or whatever. I leaned against my kitchen counter. What's going on, Trevor? It came out in a rush. He'd been fired from the bar for showing up drunk. His girlfriend had left him. He was 2 months behind on rent. Devin had mentioned running into me, said I was doing well, traveling for work. I just need something stable, he finished. You're good at stable. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. When you called me boring, I said quietly, what did you actually mean? Come on, man. That was years ago. I'm serious. What made me boring? Trevor rubbed his face. I don't know. You always wanted to plan things. You talked about your job like it mattered. You didn't party as hard as the rest of us. You seemed content, and that made the rest of us feel like shit about ourselves. There it was. So you cut me out. Yeah, we did. And it was stupid. He looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. You were the only one with his life together, and instead of learning from that, we convinced ourselves you were the problem. Classic, right? I didn't say anything for a long moment. I can send you the careers page link. I finally offered. But I can't get you a job. Our hiring process is rigorous. You'd need to apply like everyone else. That's fair. He stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About all of it. You deserved better friends. I found better friends, I said. Not cruelly, just truthfully. He nodded and left. I didn't hear from any of them again until last month, almost 5 years after that night at Denny's. I was posting photos from a work trip to Barcelona. The compliance team had rented bikes and spent a Saturday riding the coast, when my phone lit up with a message request. Chris, saw your posts. Looks like you're living your best life. Happy for you, man. Some of us aren't doing so great. Trevor's in a really bad spot. Marcus is talking about moving back in with his parents. Devin's car got repossessed, and I'm barely holding on. I know we fucked up back then, but if you ever want to reconnect, we're around. We could use a friend who has his shit together. I read it 3 times. The old me, the one who'd spent New Year's Eve alone, wondering what was wrong with him, would have felt obligated to respond, to help, to prove I wasn't holding grudges. But I'd learned something in those 5 years of solo travel late-night conversations with strangers who became friends, early morning hikes with people who appreciated silence as much as conversation. Not everyone deserves access to your peace. I didn't block Chris. I just never responded. Instead, I texted my hiking group chat, 7 people from 4 continents who I'd met through various work trips, and asked who wanted to do New Zealand next spring. 6 people responded within an hour. All yes. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 38. Boring is just a word people use when they're uncomfortable with your stability, when your contentment reflects their chaos, when you've chosen depth over distraction. The friends who called me too boring for their group are still in the same city, circling the same problems, blaming everyone but themselves. And I'm planning my next trip to Patagonia with people who think detailed itineraries are a gift, not a burden. I think about that Denny's booth sometimes. How small I felt in that moment. How convinced I was that something was wrong with me. Now I see it differently. That night wasn't an ending. It was a filter, quietly removing people who would have held me back from becoming the person I am now. The person who's not boring, just selective about who gets to understand him. If you've ever been called too much or not enough by people who weren't worth keeping, you know why I didn't text Chris back. And if you want to hear more stories about finding your people after losing the wrong ones, you can subscribe. But either way, I hope you find your version of Singapore. The place, literal or metaphorical, where you stop performing and start living.